What if I told you Washington State has more Bigfoot sightings than any other state in America, with over 700 documented encounters? These 11 disturbing stories from the Pacific Northwest will make you question everything. Drop your location and time in the comments. We want to know who's brave enough to watch this after dark. Hit subscribe and join Bleak Fears, because what you're about to hear will keep you up tonight. My name is Sage, and I'm a graphic designer from Seattle. I've been hiking the North Cascades for over a decade now, and I thought I knew those trails better than I knew my own neighborhood. The mountains had always been my escape, my therapy, the place where I could clear my head and just exist without the noise of the city pressing in on me. September 2019 changed all of that. It changed the way I see those forests, the way I think about being alone in the wilderness, and honestly, it changed the way I see myself. I'd planned a solo trip to Cascade Pass, one of my absolute favorite trails in the entire state. The weather forecast was calling for typical Pacific Northwest drizzle, nothing I hadn't handled 100 times before. I actually preferred hiking in light rain. There were fewer people on the trails, and something about the mist made the forest feel more alive, more ancient. I left the trailhead around 8 in the morning on a Thursday, my pack loaded with the usual supplies, my green rain jacket already doing its job against the moisture coming down through the evergreens. The trail was quieter than usual that day. I'd passed maybe 3 other hikers in the first hour, all of them heading back down as I climbed higher into the mountains. The fog was definitely thicker than I'd expected, rolling through the Douglas firs in these heavy, almost solid-looking waves that reduced visibility to maybe 30 feet in some sections. I remember thinking how the moisture made everything smell more intense, that rich scent of cedar and wet earth that I'd always associated with home, with safety, with peace. About 2 hours into my hike, I encountered another woman coming down the trail toward me. She looked to be about my age, maybe early 30s, wearing a green rain jacket that was almost identical to mine. I noticed immediately because it was the same brand, the same model I was wearing. She had the same hiking boots too, the expensive kind that actually keep your feet dry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, exactly like I wore mine when I was on the trail. We did that typical hiker thing where you make brief eye contact, exchange quick nods, maybe a small smile. I remember feeling this weird sense of kinship seeing someone else with such similar taste in gear. It was like seeing a reflection of myself on the trail. I kept climbing after we passed. The trail wound through switchbacks, gaining elevation steadily, and my legs were burning in that good way they do when you're really working. The kind of burn that reminds you you're alive and strong and capable. I stopped at a small clearing to drink some water. Checked my map even though I absolutely didn't need to. I'd hiked this trail so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. The fog had gotten even denser by then, turning everything beyond the immediate trail into this gray-white void that seemed to swallow sound. That's when I saw her again. She was ahead of me on the trail, maybe 50 feet up the slope. Same green jacket, same ponytail swinging as she walked, same build, same height, same everything. But she was going my direction now, heading upward, climbing just like I was. I felt this immediate confusion wash over me, trying to work out the logistics in my head. Had she somehow circled around? Was there a loop trail I'd forgotten about? But no, we'd passed each other on a completely straight section of trail with no branches, no side paths, nothing. I called out to her. "Hey, excuse me." My voice sounded weird in the fog, flat and muffled, like the air itself was swallowing the words before they could travel more than a few feet. She didn't turn around. She just kept walking at this steady, unchanging pace. I picked up my speed, suddenly curious and maybe a little irritated. Maybe she just hadn't heard me through the sound of rain pattering on leaves and the general dampness of everything. But as I walked faster, trying to close the distance between us, she seemed to maintain the exact same gap, always 50 feet ahead, always visible through the fog but never getting closer, no matter how much I increased my pace. This went on for maybe 20 minutes, and my confusion was slowly turning into something else, something that felt like cold water trickling down my spine, something that felt wrong. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop and my heart start hammering against my ribs. We had left the main trail. I stopped walking and looked around, really looked, and realized the path beneath my feet was narrower, less maintained, covered in more debris. I could see the proper trail markers back to my left, maybe 30 yards away, through the trees. I had somehow wandered completely off course without even noticing, just following this woman deeper into the woods. My heart was racing now. I turned to head back toward the main trail, but movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. She was standing still now, her back still to me, maybe 20 feet away. Just standing there in the fog, perfectly motionless, in a way that human beings don't usually stand. There was something deeply unnatural about her stillness, like she was a statue, like she wasn't breathing. "Are you okay?" I called out, and I could hear the shake in my voice, the fear I was trying to push down. She started to turn around. Slowly. So slowly it didn't look like normal human movement. It looked like she was on some kind of turntable, rotating degree by degree, taking forever to complete the turn. My brain was screaming at me that something was catastrophically wrong, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching her face come into view. It was my face. Not similar to my face. Not someone who kind of looked like me. It was exactly my face. I could see the small scar above my left eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid. I could see my slightly crooked front tooth that I'd always been self-conscious about. I could see the birthmark on my neck that I usually covered with makeup. Every single detail was perfect. I was looking at myself, standing 20 feet away in the fog, wearing the exact same clothes I was wearing, staring back at me with an expression I couldn't read and couldn't understand. Then she smiled. I wasn't smiling. I was absolutely terrified, my mouth probably hanging open in shock and horror, but she was smiling. This too wide smile that looked like someone demonstrating how the expression worked, like someone who had learned what a smile was but didn't really understand it. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were empty, flat, like looking into dark water. She held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then she turned and walked into the fog. Not quickly, not running, just walking at that same steady, unchanging pace she'd had all along. I listened to her footsteps getting quieter, fading into the ambient sound of the rain. And then there was nothing but the soft patter of water on leaves and my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my legs to start shaking. Long enough for the cold to seep through my jacket and into my bones. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in, and I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. I opened my GPS app, and it took me 40 minutes to navigate back to the main trail. Every shadow looked like her. Every sound made me jump. I practically ran the entire 3 hours back down to the trailhead, and I didn't look behind me once. I was terrified of what I might see. When I got home that evening, exhausted and emotionally destroyed, I did what I always did after a hike. I downloaded the photos from my camera to back them up. That's when my entire world tilted sideways. There were 3 photos on my camera that I absolutely positively did not take. The first one showed my tent from my camping trip the night before. I'd camped at a completely different trailhead, miles away from Cascade Pass. The photo was taken from outside the tent, looking in through the mesh window. I could see my sleeping bag, my backpack, my boots lined up neatly inside the tent vestibule. The second photo was darker, clearly taken at night. It showed me sleeping inside that tent, my face barely visible in the dim light. The angle of the shot suggested someone had unzipped the rainfly and pointed the camera down at me while I slept. The third photo was taken from farther away, showing my tent glowing softly in the darkness from my headlamp inside. And, Standing next to the tent, barely visible in the frame, was a figure in a green rain jacket. The figure was facing the camera directly, and even though the image was dark and slightly blurry, I could see enough to know it was the same face I'd seen in the fog. My face, looking at the camera with that same empty expression. I've never been back to Cascade Pass. I still hike sometimes, but never alone anymore, and never in the fog. I tried for months to rationalize what happened. Maybe there really was another woman who looked similar to me. Maybe I was tired, and my mind played tricks on me. Maybe the photos were corrupted somehow, some kind of digital glitch. But none of those explanations hold up when I really think about them. None of them explain the feeling I had when I saw my own face staring back at me in those woods. None of them explain who was in my tent that night while I slept, taking pictures of me with my own camera. Sometimes I still wake up at night convinced I can hear footsteps outside my apartment window. Steady, measured, unhurried footsteps, the sound of someone who walks at exactly my pace, who knows exactly how I move through the world. And sometimes, just for a second before I'm fully awake, I think I can see a figure standing in my bedroom doorway, backlit by the glow from the hallway. A figure wearing a green rain jacket in the darkness, standing perfectly still, watching me sleep with my own face. I've thought about those photos countless times. I've thought about that smile. And the conclusion I keep coming back to, the one that keeps me up at night, is that something in those mountains copied me. Something wore my face, walked in my boots, breathed with my lungs. And it had been watching me, studying me, maybe for days or weeks before I ever saw it on that trail. It knew where I camped. It knew how I slept. It knew everything about me. The worst part isn't what happened on the trail. The worst part is not knowing if it's still out there. Not knowing if it's still watching. Not knowing if one day I'll pass myself on the street or see my own face staring back at me from a crowd, or wake up to find myself standing at the foot of my own bed. The mountains I loved have become a source of terror, and I can never look at my own reflection quite the same way again. My name is Valerie, and I'm a 28-year-old freelance writer. In February 2021, I found myself house-sitting for my grandparents at their farmhouse outside Spokane, way out in eastern Washington, where the land is flat and empty and the sky stretches on forever. They were taking a vacation to Arizona, escaping the bitter cold for a couple weeks, and they needed someone to watch the place, keep the pipes from freezing, feed their cat. I'd been working remotely anyway, so I figured why not. A week alone in the quiet countryside sounded perfect for getting some writing done. I had no idea that week would fundamentally alter my understanding of reality. The farmhouse sat on about 40 acres of wheat fields, all covered in snow when I arrived. The nearest neighbor was almost 3 miles away. The landscape out there is so different from Western Washington, so stark and open. No mountains, no forests, just this endless expanse of white fields meeting gray sky. The house itself was old, built sometime in the 50s, with thick walls and creaky floors, and that particular smell old houses have, like dust and time and generations of living. My grandparents had lived there for 30 years, raised my mom there, built a whole life in that isolated place. The first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet, peaceful. I worked during the day, made simple meals in the evening, sat by the fireplace at night with my laptop. The cat, an orange tabby named Rusty, was good company. The only sounds were the wind across the fields and the occasional groan of the old house settling. I loved it. I felt productive, focused, completely at peace with the solitude. It was the 4th night when things started to go wrong. I'd been having trouble sleeping, probably because the bed wasn't mine and the house made unfamiliar noises. Around 2 in the morning, I was lying awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. The old radio in the kitchen turned on by itself, just clicked on with that distinctive sound radios make, That little burst of static before the station comes through clear. I got up and walked downstairs, figuring it was some kind of electrical issue, maybe a short in the wiring. Old houses do weird things. The kitchen was dark except for the small orange glow from the radio dial. It was tuned to what sounded like a normal station playing some late-night talk show. I reached out to turn it off, but just as my hand touched the dial, the station cut out. Just dead air for a moment, and then a woman's voice came through the speakers. She was reading numbers, just numbers, in this flat, emotionless tone. 47, 92, 13, 106. Then she started reading coordinates, latitude and longitude, precise to multiple decimal points. Then dates, random dates spanning decades. March 15th, 1963. October 2nd, 2008. January 27th, 1989. I stood there, listening, confused, and increasingly uncomfortable. It sounded like a number station, those weird Cold War-era broadcasts that spies supposedly used. But those were mostly gone now, relics of a different time. And then the woman's voice said something that made my blood turn to ice. She described the house, my grandparents' house. She described the wraparound porch, the metal roof, the old barn out back that was half collapsed. She described my grandfather's blue pickup truck parked in the driveway. She described the wallpaper in the kitchen, this faded yellow pattern with tiny flowers. Details that nobody should know, certainly not someone on a radio broadcast in the middle of the night. I yanked the plug out of the wall. The radio went silent immediately, and I stood there in the dark kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I checked all the doors, made sure they were locked, checked all the windows. Everything was secure. I went back upstairs and didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. The next evening, I tried to convince myself I'd been dreaming, or half asleep, or that my imagination had run wild in that big empty house. I made dinner, fed the cat, settled into the living room with my laptop. I purposely didn't go near the kitchen, but around 10 o'clock, I heard it again. The radio turning on. That same click, that same burst of static. I walked to the kitchen doorway but didn't go in. The radio was playing normally at first, some classic rock station. Then it cut to that same woman's voice, more numbers, more coordinates. But then she said, "The man sitting in the living room is wearing a blue shirt and gray sweatpants. He has a laptop open on his lap. He's drinking coffee from a white mug. Except I'm not a man. I was wearing a blue shirt and gray sweatpants. I did have my laptop. I was drinking coffee from a white mug. She had described me exactly, but gotten my gender wrong. Or maybe she wasn't describing me at all. Maybe she was describing something else, something I couldn't see. My hands were shaking as I walked back into the living room. I looked around, suddenly terrified that I wasn't alone, that someone was watching me, describing what they saw to whoever was listening to that broadcast. But the house was empty. I was sure of it. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place when I first arrived. The woman's voice continued, echoing from the kitchen. In 30 seconds, he will stand up. He will walk to the window. He will look out at the fields. He will see nothing. He will return to his seat. He will try to work, but won't be able to focus. I sat frozen, refusing to move, refusing to do what the voice said I would do. But then, like my body was moving on its own, I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the snow-covered fields, dark under the cloudy night sky. I saw nothing. I walked back and sat down. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, unable to focus on a single word. The radio went silent. For maybe 2 minutes, there was nothing but static. Then my phone rang. My phone, sitting on the coffee table right in front of me, lit up with an incoming call. No number, no caller ID, just unknown, flashing on the screen. I didn't want to answer it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to answer it. But my hand reached out, picked up the phone, pressed the answer button, brought it to my ear. I couldn't stop myself. It was like I was watching someone else control my body. "Hello?" I said, and my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Why aren't you following the script, Valerie?" It was the same woman's voice from the radio, but now she was talking directly to me, live, on my phone. "You were supposed to leave. You were supposed to get in your car and drive away 3 minutes ago. You're disrupting everything." "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "What do you want?" "The coordinates were for you. The dates were for you. Everything has been for you. Check the kitchen table." The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, my entire body shaking. I didn't want to go into the kitchen. I didn't want to see what was on that table, but again, like I wasn't in control of my own body, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The radio was off now, unplugged like I'd left it. But on the kitchen table, carved deep into the wood, were numbers, coordinates. I didn't recognize them immediately, but I pulled out my phone and typed them into a map application. They pointed to a location in the wheat fields behind the house, maybe half a mile out into the darkness. I ran upstairs, grabbed my things, threw them in my bag. I was leaving. I didn't care about watching the house anymore, didn't care about anything except getting out of there. But when I got to the front door and tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. Not locked, just stuck, like something was holding it closed from the outside. I tried the back door. Same thing. Every window I tried to open was sealed shut. The radio turned on again. "You can leave after you go to the coordinates. You have to see it first. That's how this works." I spent the next hour trying every possible way out of that house. I even considered breaking a window, but something stopped me. Some deep primal fear that whatever was outside was worse than whatever was inside. Finally, exhausted and terrified, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a flashlight, put on my coat and boots, and went out the back door, which suddenly opened easily, like it had never been stuck at all. The walk out to those coordinates was the longest half-mile of my life. The snow crunched under my boots. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing me nothing but empty fields in every direction. When I reached the spot, I didn't see anything at first, just snow and frozen earth. But then I noticed a depression in the ground, like something had been dug up and filled in recently. I didn't have a shovel. I used my hands, digging through the snow and frozen dirt, my fingers going numb within minutes. About a foot down, I found it. A metal box, old and rusted. Inside were papers, dozens of them, newspaper clippings, some of them decades old. Articles about people who had disappeared, people who had stayed at my grandparents' house, renters, house-sitters, guests. 17 people over 40 years. All of them had vanished, last seen at that farmhouse, and at the bottom of the box was a photo, recent, printed on regular printer paper. It was me, sleeping in the guest bed, taken from the doorway. Written on the back in handwriting I didn't recognize were the words, "Number 18. I ran back to the house. The doors were all open now, every single one. The lights were all on, every room blazing with light. I grabbed my bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't stop until I was back in Seattle, and I didn't tell my grandparents what happened. What could I even say? 3 days later, my grandfather called me. They'd come home early because something felt wrong. They found words carved into the kitchen table, the same coordinates. When they dug up that spot in the field, they found the box too. They called the police, who started an investigation. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. My grandparents swear that table was perfect when they left. No carvings, no damage, which means whatever carved those coordinates did it while I was in the house, and I never heard a thing. My name is Hallie, and I'm 24 years old. In November 2018, I was driving from Seattle to Spokane to visit my sister for Thanksgiving. It was a drive I'd made dozens of times before, straight across Interstate 90, through the mountains and over Snoqualmie Pass. I'd left Seattle around 9 at night because I worked late and figured the roads would be clearer. It was raining hard, the kind of heavy November rain that turns your windshield into a wall of water, even with the wipers on full speed. The visibility was terrible, but I was used to driving in Pacific Northwest weather. I thought I'd be fine. Around 11 o'clock, somewhere near Snoqualmie Pass, I realized I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I'd been drinking coffee to stay alert, and it had finally caught up with me. I saw signs for a rest stop coming up and felt relieved. I pulled off the highway into this small, poorly lit rest area. There were only 2 other cars in the parking lot, both of them dark and empty-looking. The place had that desolate feeling. Rest stops get late at night, like you're the only person left in the world. I parked close to the bathroom building and made a run for it through the rain. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh and flickering, making everything look sickly and wrong. The bathroom was one of those older ones, with stalls that had gaps at the bottom and top, the kind where you never really feel alone. I went into the middle stall, locked the door, and tried to be quick. I just wanted to get back on the road. That's when I heard the main door open. Footsteps. Heavy boots on tile squeaking slightly from the wet. The footsteps stopped. I looked down and saw shoes under the door of my stall. Work boots, brown, covered in mud. They were facing my stall directly, toes pointed right at me. Someone was standing there, just standing there, not moving. I froze. My heart was suddenly pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited for the person to move, to go to another stall, to wash their hands, to do anything normal. But they just stood there, completely still, not shifting weight, not moving at all, just standing there, facing my stall door. I could see the bottom 6 inches of their legs, dark jeans, those muddy work boots, nothing else. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe if I waited them out, they'd eventually leave, or move, or do something. So I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They never moved. Not even slightly. I started to feel panic rising in my chest. Something about this was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Normal people don't stand motionless outside bathroom stalls. Normal people don't just stand there without making any sound, without shifting their weight, without doing any of the tiny unconscious movements humans make. I was trying to decide what to do when I heard breathing. Heavy breathing, like someone who'd been running. But the person at my door hadn't moved at all. They couldn't be out of breath. The breathing got louder, and I realized with horror that they were breathing hard while standing completely still. Just standing there, staring at my stall door, breathing like they'd just finished a sprint. I made a decision. I couldn't stay in there forever. I took a deep breath, unlocked the stall door, and shoved it open as hard as I could. I burst out running, heading straight for the exit. And that's when I saw him. He was standing right where those boots had been, just a foot from the stall door. Tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a dark rain jacket with the hood up. But it was his face that made me scream. Or rather, his lack of expression. He was just staring at me with these completely empty eyes, his face slack, and in his right hand he was holding a hunting knife. Long blade, at least 8 inches, the kind you use for gutting deer. He didn't say anything, didn't move toward me, just stood there, holding that knife, staring at me with that blank face. I ran. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, shoved through the bathroom door, and sprinted across the parking lot. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I could barely see my car. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy boots slapping on wet pavement, but I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I reached my car, yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. That's when I looked up and saw him standing directly in front of my car, illuminated by my headlights. He was just standing there in the rain, water streaming down his jacket, holding that knife down at his side. His face was completely expressionless. He raised his left hand slowly, and I saw he'd written something on his palm in what looked like black marker. He pressed his palm against my windshield. Through the rain and the glass, I could read what he'd written. It was my license plate number, my exact license plate number, written on his hand. I threw the car in reverse and floored it, backing up so fast I almost hit one of the concrete barriers. I put it in drive and peeled out of that parking lot, spraying gravel and water. I looked in my rear-view mirror once. He was still standing there in the middle of the parking lot, lit up by my taillights, watching me leave. Not chasing me. Not running. Just standing there in the rain, holding that knife, watching. I didn't stop driving. I called 911 while I was still on the highway, my voice shaking so badly the dispatcher could barely understand me. I told them everything. They said they'd send someone to check the rest stop. I kept driving, checking my mirrors every few seconds, terrified I'd see headlights following me. But there was nothing. Just rain and darkness, and the occasional car going the opposite direction. I drove straight to my sister's house. I didn't stop for gas. I didn't stop for anything. When I got there around 2 in the morning, I was still shaking. My sister took one look at me and knew something terrible had happened. I told her everything while we sat in her living room, and she called the police again from Spokane to make sure someone had checked that rest stop. They called back an hour later. They'd searched the rest stop. There was no one there. No cars except the 2 I'd mentioned, both of which were abandoned, reported stolen weeks earlier from different parts of the state. No footprints, because the rain had washed everything away. No evidence anyone had been there at all. 3 days later, I was back at my apartment in Seattle. I'd taken the week off work, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound. That's when I found the letter. It was in my mailbox, no stamp, no return address. Just my name written on the envelope in block letters. Inside was a single piece of paper with a photograph printed on it. The photo showed my car in that rest stop parking lot. Taken from somewhere nearby, maybe from the trees at the edge of the lot. You could see me through the windshield, illuminated by the interior light, looking terrified. And at the bottom of the photo, handwritten in the same block letters, were the words, "Next time." I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I filed a police report about the letter, gave them the photo, told them everything again. They opened an investigation, but nothing ever came of it. No fingerprints on the letter or envelope. The photo was printed on standard printer paper that could have come from anywhere. There was nothing to trace. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. My address wasn't public information. I'd always been careful about that. My apartment was in a building that required a key fob to enter, and my unit number wasn't listed anywhere online, which means he followed me home. He followed me all the way from that rest stop in the mountains to Seattle, somehow figured out where I lived, and delivered that letter personally. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't use rest stops ever. I plan my trips so I never have to stop between cities. And I sold that car. I couldn't stand looking at it, couldn't stand driving it, knowing he'd stood in front of it, knowing he had my license plate number memorized, knowing he'd touched my windshield. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, if he's still watching, if he's found where I moved to. The police told me it was probably a random thing, that I was just unlucky, that he was probably some transient who happened to be at that rest stop. But that doesn't explain the letter. That doesn't explain how he found my apartment. That doesn't explain the look on his face, that complete emptiness, like there was nothing human behind his eyes at all. I see therapists now. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I have nightmares about bathroom stalls and muddy boots and men standing in the rain. But the worst dreams are the ones where I'm going about my normal day, walking to work, or grocery shopping, or just existing, and I see him in the crowd, standing still while everyone else moves around him, staring at me with those empty eyes, holding up his hand to show me he still has my information, that he's never forgotten, that he's just waiting. My sister thinks I should have stayed at her place in Spokane, that Seattle isn't safe. But nowhere feels safe anymore. Nowhere feels like somewhere he couldn't find me if he wanted to. The police said the investigation is still technically open, but I know they're not actively working on it. What can they do? A man with a knife at a rest stop who disappeared into the rain. No name, no clear description beyond tall man in a rain jacket. It could be anyone. I keep that photo, even though my therapist says I shouldn't. I keep it in a drawer in my bedroom, and sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I take it out and look at it. I look at my own terrified face through that windshield. I look at the darkness surrounding my car, and I try to see if there are any other details in the image, anything that might tell me who he is or why he chose me. But there's nothing. Just me and my car and that message at the bottom. Next time. Like it's inevitable. Like it's already decided. Like he's just waiting for the right moment to finish whatever he started that night in the rain. My name is Kalani, and I'm 41 years old. I work as a marine biologist, which means I've spent most of my adult life around water, studying ocean ecosystems and feeling completely at home near the coast. In March 2020, right before everything shut down for the pandemic, I took a few days off to visit Port Townsend on the Olympic Peninsula. I'd always loved that little Victorian seaport town, with its historic buildings and fog-shrouded waterfront. I booked a room at a small hotel right on the water, planning to spend my mornings walking the beach and my afternoons reading in coffee shops. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a chance to recharge before the chaos of the world really set in. I'm an early riser by nature, always have been. There's something about the early morning that I find peaceful, especially near the ocean. On my second day there, I woke up around 5 in the morning, well before sunrise. The fog was incredibly thick that day, the kind of dense Pacific Northwest fog that turns everything into gray soup. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, but I loved it. There's something primal and ancient about walking through fog that thick, like you're moving through a different world entirely. I got dressed, pulled on my jacket and boots, and headed down to the beach. The hotel staff had warned me the night before that fog was expected, but I didn't care. I'd walked beaches in worse conditions. The sand was damp and firm under my feet, and the sound of small waves lapping at the shore was muffled by the fog, making everything feel quiet and distant. I walked north along the waterline, my hands in my pockets, my breath making small clouds in the cold air. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I saw them, figures in the water. At first, I thought they were other early morning walkers, maybe people doing some kind of polar bear swim thing. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't swimming. They were standing, waist deep in the water, maybe 30 or 40 feet from shore. There were dozens of them, spread out in a rough line parallel to the beach, all of them facing away from land, facing out toward the open water of Puget Sound. I stopped walking and just stared. Something about the scene felt immediately wrong. They weren't moving. Not at all. They were just standing there, in the cold water, perfectly still, all facing the same direction. The fog was thick enough that I couldn't see their features clearly, just their silhouettes, dark shapes against the lighter gray of the fog. I counted maybe 20 or 30 of them, though there could have been more farther down the beach that I couldn't see. I called out, "Hey, are you guys okay?" My voice sounded flat and dead in the fog, like it couldn't travel more than a few feet. None of them responded. None of them moved. They just stood there in that freezing water, and I realized with growing unease that I couldn't hear them breathing, couldn't hear any sounds of movement, couldn't hear anything but the gentle lap of waves. I started walking closer to the waterline, trying to get a better look. That's when one of them turned around, slowly, mechanically, like a mannequin on a rotating display. And when I saw its face, my blood went cold. The features were wrong. Not grotesque exactly, but blurred, like someone had taken a photograph and smeared it while it was still wet. The eyes were in approximately the right place, but they were just dark smudges. The mouth was a vague line. The nose was barely suggested. It was like looking at a rough draft of a human face, an approximation that got the general idea but missed all the details. The figure raised one arm out of the water. Slowly, dripping, it raised its arm and pointed directly at me. And then, as if that was some kind of signal, all of them stopped. Every single figure in the water stopped moving, stopped whatever strange stillness they'd been holding. And then, in perfect unison, they all turned to face me. I felt terror slam into me like a physical force. 20 or 30 blurred faces, all turning at the exact same moment, all focusing on me with those smudged wrong eyes. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. And then together they all raised their arms. All of them. Same gesture, arms rising from the water, dripping, pointing at me in unison. I ran. I turned and ran back toward the hotel as fast as I could. The sand was harder to run on than I expected, and I kept slipping, nearly falling twice. Behind me, I thought I could hear splashing, like something moving through the water, but I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just ran through that thick fog, my heart hammering, my breath coming in gasps. I made it back to the hotel in what felt like seconds, but must have been several minutes. I burst through the front door, probably looking completely insane, soaking wet from the knees down, gasping for air. The young woman working the front desk looked up in alarm. "Are you okay?" she asked, standing up from her chair. "There are people in the water," I managed to say between breaths. "Out on the beach, standing in the water. Something's wrong with them." She looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not disbelief exactly. Something else. Something like resignation or maybe recognition. "Did they turn around?" she asked quietly. "Did they look at you?" The question made my skin crawl. "Yes," I said. They all turned around. At the same time. "How did you know?" She sighed and gestured for me to sit down in one of the lobby chairs. She poured me a cup of coffee from the pot behind the desk and sat down across from me. "You saw the fog walkers," she said. "That's what the old-timers around here call them. They show up in heavy fog, usually early morning, always standing in the water like that, always facing away from shore." "What are they?" I asked, my hands wrapped around the coffee cup, trying to stop shaking. "Nobody knows," she said. "There are stories going back over 100 years. Native tribes that lived here have legends about them too, though they call them something different. Spirit people who walk between the worlds. The fog is like a doorway for them or something. Most people who see them don't get close enough for them to turn around. You're not supposed to make them aware of you." "What happens if they're aware of you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Different things, according to different stories," she said. "Some people say nothing happens at all. They just disappear back into the fog. Others say the fog walkers come back, that they remember you, that they come for you later." I felt sick. "Come for you how?" She shrugged. "Like I said, different stories. Some people report seeing them in their houses, standing at the foot of their bed, standing in their shower, standing outside their windows, always just standing there, watching. Others say they try to call you into the water. You hear voices in the fog calling your name, trying to get you to walk into the sound and join them." "This is insane," I said. "You're telling me there are just supernatural entities that show up in Port Townsend and nobody does anything about it." "What would we do?" she asked. "Call the police, tell them there are ghost people in the water. They show up, they stand there, they disappear. They don't hurt anyone, at least not directly. It's just something that happens here. Has been happening for as long as anyone can remember." I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. I packed my bags and checked out 3 hours later, cutting my trip short by 2 days. The desk clerk didn't seem surprised. "A lot of people leave early after they see them," she said. "Don't worry too much about it. Probably nothing will happen." Probably. That word has haunted me ever since. I drove back to Seattle that afternoon, constantly checking my rearview mirror, though I don't know what I was expecting to see. When I got home, I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was just a weird experience, something I'd misinterpreted, maybe people in costumes playing an elaborate prank. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew what I'd seen. Those weren't people. Those weren't anything human. A week later, I woke up at 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. My apartment is on the 4th floor, and my bedroom window faces an alley. When I walked back from the bathroom, I glanced at the window, and my heart stopped. There was a figure standing in the alley below, looking up at my window. Even from 4 floors up, even in the dim light from the street lamp, I could see that the face was wrong. Blurred. Smudged. Approximate. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just looking up at me. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I pulled all my curtains closed and sat on my couch with every light in the apartment turned on. Since then, I've seen them 3 more times. Once standing outside the coffee shop where I was working, visible through the window. Once in the parking garage where I park my car, standing between 2 vehicles, watching me walk to my car. And once, most terrifyingly, standing in my bathroom when I opened the shower curtain. It was there for just a second, that blurred face looking at me. And then it was gone. I've talked to therapists. I've tried medication for anxiety. I've moved apartments twice. Nothing helps. They keep showing up, always in fog, always just standing there, watching me with those wrong faces. They never speak. They never move toward me. They just watch. I called the hotel in Port Townsend last month, trying to get more information. An older woman answered, someone different from the young clerk I'd talked to. When I asked about the fog walkers, there was a long pause. "You saw them?" she asked finally. "Yes," I said. "And they keep appearing, in Seattle, where I live." Another long pause. "That's unusual," she said quietly. "They usually stay near the water, near Port Townsend. I've never heard of them following someone home before. You must have really caught their attention." "What do they want?" I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Nobody knows," she said. "They've been here longer than the town, longer than the settlers, longer than anyone. Maybe they don't want anything. Maybe they're just watching. Maybe they're waiting." "Waiting for what?" "Nobody who's found out has ever come back to tell us," she said, and then she hung up. I still see them. They appear in the fog, always watching, always silent, and I'm terrified that one day I'll understand what they're waiting for. My name is Freya, and I'm 19 years old. In October 2022, I did something incredibly stupid. My friends and I decided to explore abandoned houses in Olympia. We were into urban exploration, that whole thing where you go into old buildings and take photos and pretend you're discovering something. Looking back, I realize how naive and reckless we were. But at 19, you think you're invincible. You think nothing bad can actually happen to you. There were 3 of us that night. Me and 2 friends I'd known since high school. We'd spent weeks researching abandoned places around Olympia, looking at forums and old Reddit posts, trying to find the best locations. Someone mentioned a house in the Viewmont neighborhood, an old Victorian that had been empty for years. The post said it was creepy as hell, that weird things happened there, but we figured that was just people trying to make it sound more interesting than it was. We arrived around 9 at night. The house looked like something out of a horror movie, which honestly made us more excited. 3 stories tall, peeling paint, broken windows, moss growing up the sides. Classic Pacific Northwest decay. The front door was boarded up, but someone had already pried the boards loose, probably other explorers before us. We slipped inside, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The inside was worse than the outside. Water damage everywhere, holes in the floor, graffiti covering the walls. But it was the smell that hit me first. Not just mold and rot, which you'd expect. There was something else underneath it. Something metallic and wrong. Like rust and meat left out too long. My friend Adeline mentioned it too, wrinkling her nose, but we kept going. The first floor was mostly empty. A few pieces of broken furniture, some old newspapers from the 70s. We took some photos, explored the kitchen where the cabinets hung open like mouths. Then we headed upstairs. That's when things started to feel different. The temperature dropped noticeably on the second floor, enough that I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. and the smell got stronger. That metallic wrongness that made my stomach turn. We found a bedroom that looked like it had belonged to a child. The wallpaper was faded pink, with little flowers, peeling away in long strips, and covering the walls, written over and over in what looked like crayon, or maybe marker, were the same words repeated hundreds of times. He won't let us leave. He won't let us leave. He won't let us leave. Over and over, covering every available surface, written in a child's handwriting. My friend Wells laughed nervously. "Okay, that's creepy as hell," he said. But I couldn't laugh. Something about those words made my skin crawl. There was desperation in them, in the way they'd been written over and over, like whoever wrote them had been trying to convince themselves or warn someone, or maybe just had nothing else to do but write the same thing, again and again. We heard footsteps above us, heavy boots on the third floor, walking slowly across the ceiling. We all froze. The footsteps went from one end of the house to the other, deliberate and measured. Then they stopped. "We should go," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. But before anyone could respond, the footsteps started again. This time they were on the stairs, coming down. Heavy boots on wood, creaking with each step, coming toward us. We panicked. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We scattered like startled animals. I ran for the stairs we'd come up, but Wells and Adeline went the opposite direction, toward what I thought was a dead end. I made it down to the first floor and was heading for the front door when I realized I was alone. I turned around, and both of them were gone. Just gone. The house had somehow swallowed them in the few seconds I wasn't looking. I called their names. No response. I could still hear those footsteps, slower now, reaching the second floor. I knew I should run, should get out and call the police, but I couldn't leave them. I went back toward the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when the door to the basement slammed open. I hadn't even noticed there was a basement door, but there it was, hanging open in the darkness. And from somewhere below, I heard Adeline screaming. Not words, just this raw sound of pure terror. I ran to the doorway and shone my light down. Wooden stairs, descending into absolute darkness. The smell was overpowering now, that metallic rot smell, and underneath it something else. Copper. Blood. "Adeline!" I screamed down into the darkness. The screaming stopped, just cut off mid-sound like someone had pressed a mute button. And then I felt it. Breath on the back of my neck. Hot breath that smelled like decay and earth and something I couldn't identify. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing there. But I felt it. I felt something standing right behind me, close enough to touch, close enough that the breath had moved the hair on my neck. And then I heard the voice, right next to my ear, a whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head. It said my name, but it said more than that. It whispered things about me that nobody should know. It whispered about my childhood address, the house I'd lived in when I was 7. It whispered my sister's name, the sister who died when I was 10, the one I never talked about. It whispered about where my grandmother was buried, the specific plot number in the cemetery, details that were buried in public records, maybe, but not things anyone would just know. Not things anyone should be whispering in my ear in an abandoned house. The basement door slammed shut. The temperature plummeted even further. My flashlight started flickering, and then I heard all of them. Wells calling my name from somewhere above me. Adeline screaming from somewhere I couldn't locate. Both of them calling for help, their voices overlapping and echoing through the house in ways that didn't make physical sense. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. I ran for the front door and threw myself outside into the October night. I stood on the overgrown lawn, gasping for air, my whole body shaking, and then, one by one, the others came out. Wells first, stumbling out of the door with blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. Then Adeline, climbing out of a broken window on the first floor, covered in dust and cobwebs, her hands shaking. We didn't speak. We just ran to the car and got the hell out of there. It wasn't until we were blocks away, sitting in a well-lit parking lot, that we finally talked about what happened. Wells couldn't explain his cut. He didn't remember hitting anything, didn't remember falling. It was just there, bleeding down his face. Adeline said she'd been pulled into the basement by something she couldn't see, that hands had grabbed her in the darkness, hands that were too cold and too strong, and she'd only escaped by climbing up through a coal chute she hadn't known was there. We all heard the voice, every single one of us, and it had known things about each of us, personal things, family things, secrets that we'd never shared with anyone. It had whispered them in our ears like it was reading from our own memories. We reported it to the police the next day, told them we'd been in the house and something attacked us. They weren't happy about the trespassing, but they sent officers to check it out. They came back saying the house was empty. No signs of anyone living there. No signs of recent activity except for our footprints and the damage we'd done breaking in. They found Adeline's blood in the basement, which confirmed at least that part of her story, but nothing else. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. One of the officers pulled me aside before they left. Older guy, probably in his 50s, looked like he'd seen everything. He asked me if we'd heard about the house's history. I said no. He told me a family had died there in the 70s. Murder-suicide. Father killed his wife and 2 kids, then himself. The kids had been locked in that bedroom we'd found, the one with the writing on the walls. They'd been in there for days before he finally killed them, writing those words over and over on the walls. That house has a reputation, he said quietly. We get called out there maybe once a year. Kids exploring, squatters trying to stay there. Nobody lasts more than an hour. Everyone reports the same things. Footsteps, voices, feeling like they're being watched, getting touched by something they can't see. We've tried to get it condemned, torn down, but every demolition crew that tries to work on it has equipment failures. Tools break, machines malfunction. Workers refuse to come back. It's like the house doesn't want to go. 3 weeks after that night, Wells sent us both a news article. Another attempted demolition of the house. Another failure. This time, a wrecking ball had snapped its cable and crashed through the cab of the crane, nearly killing the operator. The construction company had refused to make another attempt. The house was still standing. I drive past it sometimes, even though I know I shouldn't. It's still there, still empty, still waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel that breath on my neck again. I hear that voice whispering things it shouldn't know. I wake up convinced that something followed me home from that house, that whatever was in there got under my skin somehow, learned everything about me, and decided to keep me. Adeline has scars on her back now, 3 parallel scratches that run from her shoulder blades to her lower back. They appeared 2 days after that night, just showed up, like something had clawed her, and the marks had taken time to manifest. Wells's cut never fully healed right. It's still there, a red line above his eye that never quite faded. He moved to a different city a few months later, refuses to talk about that night anymore. And me, I still hear the whispers sometimes. In the quiet moments, in the spaces between sounds, I hear that voice telling me things about myself, reminding me that it knows me, that it saw inside me, that something in that house on Viewmont looked into my soul and decided to remember everything it found there. I'll never explore another abandoned building, never. Whatever was in that house wasn't a ghost, wasn't some harmless spirit hanging around. It was something else, something malevolent and intelligent and patient, something that feeds on fear and intrusion and the stupid curiosity of kids who think they're invincible. We went into that house looking for an adventure, looking for something to make us feel alive, and we found something that reminded us how easy it is to die. The worst part is knowing it's still there, still in that house, still waiting for the next group of stupid kids to wander in with their flashlights and cameras, still whispering secrets it shouldn't know, still touching people with invisible hands, still keeping people trapped in rooms that shouldn't exist. The house on Viewmont has been standing for over 100 years, and based on what that officer told me, based on how many demolition attempts have failed, it's going to be standing for 100 more. Sometimes I wonder if the house is alive somehow, if it feeds on the fear of people who enter it, if it grows stronger with every person who runs out screaming, every drop of blood spilled on its floors, every secret it learns by reaching into people's minds. I wonder if that family who died there in the 70s are still trapped inside somehow, if those kids are still writing on the walls, still begging to be let out. I wonder if one day I'll drive past and see myself standing in one of the windows, just standing there with that blank expression, staring out at the street, waiting for someone else to come inside. Because part of me feels like I never really left that house. Part of me is still standing in that hallway, feeling breath on my neck, hearing whispers in my ear. Part of me will always be trapped in that moment when I realized that some places are wrong, fundamentally and completely wrong, and no amount of logic or reason can explain what lives inside them. The house on Viewmont is one of those places, and now that it knows me, now that it's whispered my secrets back to me, I don't think it's ever going to let me forget that I was there. I don't think it's ever going to stop reminding me that I walked into its darkness willingly, and something in that darkness decided I was worth remembering. My name is Valeria, and I'm 36 years old. I work as a software engineer, which means I spend most of my days staring at screens and solving logical problems. I'm the kind of person who believes in facts, in things that can be explained and understood. Or at least, I used to be that kind of person. What happened to me in August 2021 shattered every belief I had about how reality works. I was driving Coastal Highway 101, one of the most beautiful drives in Washington State. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, perfect weather, and I was heading from Port Angeles down toward Calilock for a weekend camping trip. I'd done this drive before, loved the way the road winds along the coast with the ocean on one side and forest on the other. I had my music playing, my windows down, just enjoying the drive and the warm summer air. I remember passing mile marker 47 very clearly. I noticed it because I was checking my progress, knowing I needed to turn at mile marker 52 to get to the campground. I glanced at my phone's GPS to confirm I was on track. Everything was normal. The time was 2:15 in the afternoon. I had about 20 minutes left to drive. I kept driving, singing along to the radio, watching the scenery roll by. The road was fairly empty that day, just the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. After what felt like maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I glanced at the mile markers again to see how close I was to my turn. Mile marker 47, the exact same marker I'd passed 20 minutes earlier. I felt confused for a moment. Had I misread it? Had I somehow gotten turned around without noticing? But no, I was definitely heading south. The ocean was on my right where it should be. I was going the right direction. I must have just misread the first marker, I told myself. I kept driving. Another 20 minutes passed. I was getting a little concerned now because I should have reached mile marker 52 by now, should have seen signs for the campground turnoff. I looked for the next mile marker 47. Again, the exact same marker, in the exact same spot, with the exact same dead tree next to it that I'd noticed the first time. My stomach dropped. This wasn't possible. I checked my GPS and it had frozen, stuck on a loading screen that wouldn't refresh. I tried to restart the app, but it wouldn't respond. My phone said it was 2:53 in the afternoon, which meant I'd been driving for almost 40 minutes, but I kept passing the same mile marker over and over. I pulled over to the side of the road and got out of my car. My hands were shaking. I walked up to the mile marker and touched it, like physically touching it would somehow make it more real or help me understand what was happening. It was solid, real, a normal highway marker. I looked up and down the road. Empty, completely empty. I hadn't seen another car in the last stretch of driving, I realized. No cars going either direction. I got back in my car and kept driving, faster now, actually pushing the speed limit. I was telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe there were multiple mile marker 47s, some kind of error when they installed them. Maybe my GPS was glitching and confusing me. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I could feel it in my bones, this creeping sense that I'd driven out of normal reality and into something else. 30 more minutes of driving. Mile marker 47 again. The same dead tree. The same curve in the road. The same everything. My gas gauge hadn't moved. The time on my dashboard clock now said 3:20, but my phone said 2:53 still, frozen on that time. The radio had gone to static at some point, just white noise hissing through the speakers. I tried calling someone, anyone, no signal. I tried the emergency call function, nothing. I was completely cut off, driving an endless loop of the same stretch of highway, passing the same marker over and over with no way to break the cycle. The fourth time I passed mile marker 47, I noticed something different. The forest around me had changed. It was too quiet. No birds. No wind rustling the leaves. No sound of waves from the ocean that should have been right there beyond the trees. Just absolute silence except for my engine and tires on pavement. And the light was wrong. It was still bright and sunny, but the quality of the light had changed somehow. It looked flat, artificial, like stage lighting instead of real sunlight. I was starting to panic now, my breath coming faster, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I kept driving because I didn't know what else to do. Stopping felt dangerous somehow. Like if I stopped moving, something worse would happen. The fifth time I passed mile marker 47, I saw my car. My exact car. Same make, model, color, even the same dent in the rear bumper from when I'd backed into a pole last year. It was parked on the shoulder ahead of me, just sitting there, empty. I slowed down as I approached it, staring at this impossible duplicate of my vehicle. The license plate was the same. Everything was the same. I stopped my car right next to it and got out. My legs felt weak, unsteady. I walked over to the other car and looked in the windows. Empty. Keys in the ignition. But then I looked closer and saw something in the driver's seat. A phone. My phone. Same case, same crack in the screen protector. I tried the door. Unlocked. I picked up the phone and it turned on, showing my lock screen, my apps, my photos. It was my phone. But my phone was in my pocket. I pulled out my phone and held them next to each other. Identical. That's when I saw the driver's seat. Someone was sitting there. I could see them now, even though the seat had been empty a second ago. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat, slumped over, face hidden. I reached out slowly, my hand shaking, and touched their shoulder to turn them toward me. It was me. My face. Eyes closed like I was sleeping. Same clothes I was wearing, same everything. I was looking at myself, sleeping in the driver's seat of my own car, holding my own phone, standing on an endless loop of highway that I couldn't escape. I screamed. I stumbled backward and fell onto the pavement. And the other me, the sleeping me, opened her eyes. She looked directly at me and smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. Like she understood something I didn't. Like she was waiting for this moment. I ran back to my car, threw myself inside, locked the doors. I looked back, and the other car was gone. Just gone. The space where it had been parked was empty. I put my car in drive and floored it, not caring about speed limits anymore, just desperate to get away from whatever this was. And then suddenly, like waking up from a dream, I was past it. I looked up and saw mile marker 53. I jumped from 47 to 53, skipping 5 miles entirely. My GPS flickered back to life. The radio came back, playing the same song that had been on when this started. My phone showed 4:27 in the afternoon. I pulled over immediately and just sat there, shaking, crying, trying to understand what had just happened. I'd lost over 2 hours. 2 hours of my life just gone, looped, repeated, stuck in some impossible stretch of highway that shouldn't exist. My car's odometer showed I'd driven an extra 300 miles. 300 miles going nowhere, trapped in a loop that kept returning me to mile marker 47 over and over. I didn't go camping that weekend. I turned around and drove straight home to Seattle, checking my mirrors constantly, terrified I'd see that other car following me, or that I'd somehow loop back into that trapped stretch of highway. The drive home was normal. Every mile marker in sequence, traffic, other cars, everything as it should be. When I got home, I checked everything. My phone log showed I'd been out of service for 2 hours and 17 minutes. My car's GPS history showed the route to mile marker 47, then just nothing. A blank space, then suddenly picking up again at mile marker 53. Like those 2 hours existed in a pocket outside of normal space and time. I started researching. I found scattered reports online of people experiencing something similar on Highway 101. Time distortions, looping sections of road, missing time. One post from 2015 described almost exactly what happened to me, including seeing their own car parked on the shoulder. But there was never any explanation. No official acknowledgement. Just these scattered accounts from people who'd driven into something that shouldn't exist and somehow made it back out. The worst part came 3 weeks later. I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Static. Just static on the line. And then, very faintly underneath the static, I heard my own voice. My voice saying, "Turn around, come back, you're not finished." Over and over. My own voice calling to me from somewhere, from that stretch of highway maybe, calling me back to mile marker 47. I changed my number. I've never driven Highway 101 again. I take the long way around now, adding hours to any trip just to avoid that section of coast. But sometimes, when I'm driving anywhere at all, I'll see a mile marker, and my heart will start racing. I'll check the next one compulsively, terrified that I'll see the same number again, that I'll have slipped back into that loop without noticing. I think about that other version of me that I saw sleeping in the car. Was that a future version? A past version? Some other version that exists in that trapped space, doomed to loop forever? Or was it a warning? A glimpse of what I would have become if I hadn't somehow broken free? I don't know. I'll never know. But I know that somewhere on Highway 101, there's a section of road that doesn't obey normal rules, a place where time folds in on itself, where you can drive for hours and get nowhere, where you might meet yourself coming and going. And I know that it's still there, still waiting, still pulling cars into its loop, and maybe, just maybe, not letting all of them back out. I wonder sometimes how many other cars are still trapped there. How many other drivers are still passing mile marker 47 over and over, burning gas that never decreases, watching clocks that don't match, slowly realizing they're caught in something impossible. I wonder if they see duplicates of their cars, if they see themselves sleeping in the driver's seat, if they ever make it out. I made it out. But part of me is still there. Part of me is still driving that endless loop, still passing that marker, still trapped in those 2 lost hours. And sometimes I can feel it calling me back. My name is Everly, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a freelance photographer, which means I travel a lot for work and spend a fair amount of time alone in remote places. I've always been comfortable with solitude, never been the type to get spooked easily. But what happened to me in January 2023 changed all of that. It changed the way I think about being alone, about isolation, about what might be watching when you think nobody else is around. I'd rented a cabin near Lake Chelan for a week-long writing and photography retreat. I was working on a personal project, a photo series about winter landscapes in Washington, and I needed the quiet and isolation to focus. The cabin was perfect for what I needed. Small, rustic, situated about 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by pine trees and overlooking the frozen lake. The rental listing had mentioned that cell service was spotty, but I didn't care. I wanted to disconnect anyway. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of January. The property owner had left the keys in a lockbox, and I let myself in. The cabin was exactly as advertised. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, living area with a fireplace, and large windows overlooking the lake. Everything was covered in snow, at least 6 inches on the ground, and more was forecast for that week. I unpacked my things, started a fire, made myself dinner, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful, productive week. The first 2 days were perfect. I worked during the daylight hours, took photos of the snowy landscape, edited images in the evening. The solitude was exactly what I needed. No distractions, no interruptions, just me and my work and the quiet of the winter forest. I slept well, ate simple meals, felt more relaxed than I had in months. On the 3rd night, at exactly 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound. A single, loud knock on the front door. Sharp and deliberate, loud enough to wake me from a deep sleep. I lay in bed for a moment, disoriented, trying to figure out if I'd really heard it, or if it was part of a dream. Then I heard it again. 1 knock, loud, deliberate. Someone was at my door at 2 in the morning. I got up and walked to the living room, my heart starting to beat faster. I looked through the window next to the door. Nobody there. I could see the porch clearly in the light from the motion sensor that had clicked on. Empty. Fresh snow on the porch, completely undisturbed. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood there staring at the empty porch for maybe a minute, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was ice falling from the roof, I told myself. Maybe a branch hit the door. Some rational explanation. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept listening for sounds, kept getting up to check the windows, kept feeling like something was wrong. The next night, the same thing happened. 2:15 in the morning this time. 1 loud knock on the front door. I got up immediately and looked out the window. Nothing. Nobody. Undisturbed snow on the porch. But this time, I noticed something. The knock hadn't come from the front door. I'd been listening carefully, and the sound had come from the back door, the one that led out to the deck overlooking the lake. I walked through the cabin to the back door and looked out. Empty deck. Fresh snow. No footprints. But the motion sensor light had turned on, which meant something had triggered it. Something had been on that deck. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, watching both doors, listening to every sound the old cabin made. Nothing happened. No more knocks, just the wind in the trees and the occasional crack of ice on the lake. The next night, I tried to prepare myself. I set up my camera pointing at the front door, ready to capture whatever was making that sound. I went to bed but barely dozed, waiting for the knock. It came at 2:30, but this time it wasn't 1 knock. It was knocking on every door and window simultaneously. Front door, back door, bedroom window, bathroom window, living room windows, all at once. The same rhythmic knocking, happening all around the cabin at exactly the same time. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room. The motion sensors on all sides of the cabin had turned on, flooding the entire property with light. I ran from window to window, looking out, trying to see what was doing this. Nothing. Nobody. Just empty snow in every direction. But the knocking continued. Steady, rhythmic, persistent. Knock, knock, knock. All around the cabin. On every surface. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I'd known the service was bad, but now I had nothing. Not even emergency calls would go through. I was completely cut off, alone in this cabin with something knocking on every door and window, something I couldn't see or explain. The knocking went on for 3 hours. Just constant knocking, all around the cabin, never stopping. I sat in the middle of the living room floor, as far from all the walls as I could get, hugging my knees to my chest, trying not to lose my mind. Around 5:30 in the morning, it stopped. Just stopped all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Silence. Complete silence except for my own ragged breathing. When the sun came up, I put on my boots and coat and went outside to look around. The snow around the cabin was covered in handprints. Hundreds of handprints pressed into the snow on the porch, on the deck, under every window. Adult-sized hands, but the fingers were wrong. Too long, too many knuckles. I counted the joints on one clear print. 4 knuckles per finger instead of 3. I ran back inside, locked all the doors, and started packing. I was leaving. I didn't care about losing my deposit or abandoning my project. I needed to get out of there. But when I went to the front door with my bags, I couldn't open it. The door wouldn't budge. Not locked, just stuck, like something was holding it shut from the outside. I tried the back door. Same thing. Every window I tried to open was sealed shut. I was trapped. I spent that entire day trying every possible way out. I even considered breaking a window, but something stopped me. Some deep instinct that said breaking the window would be worse, would let something in rather than letting me out. So I waited. I sat on the couch with my packed bags, and I waited for night to fall, terrified of what would happen when darkness came. The knocking started again at 8 o'clock that night, hours before it had started on previous nights. But this time it was different. This time there was a voice, my voice, coming from outside the cabin, from all around the cabin. I could hear myself calling for help. "Help me! Please help me! I'm out here! Please open the door!" My own voice, my exact voice, screaming and crying and begging to be let in. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it. My voice crying, my voice screaming, my voice saying, "Don't leave me out here. Please. It's so cold. I'm freezing. Please let me in." Over and over, for hours. My own voice begging me to open the door. I knew it wasn't me. I knew I was inside, that whatever was outside was just mimicking my voice somehow. But it was so convincing, so perfect. It knew exactly how I sounded when I was scared, when I was desperate. It had studied me somehow, learned me, and now it was using my own voice against me. Around midnight, the voice changed tactics. It started saying things only I should know, private things. It described my apartment in Seattle, the one nobody had visited in months. It described the coffee shop where I worked on my laptop every Thursday. It described my mother's house, the bedroom I'd grown up in, details that nobody else should know, memories that were mine alone. The voice was doing more than mimicking me. It was inside my head somehow, pulling out my memories and throwing them back at me. And then it said something that made my blood run cold. "I know you can see me through the camera. I've been watching you watch me. You took my picture on the first day. I'm in your camera. You brought me inside with you." I looked at my camera, sitting on the table where I'd left it. I'd taken hundreds of photos since arriving. Landscape shots, the cabin, the lake. What if I'd accidentally photographed something? What if I'd captured something in one of those images, and by looking at it, by uploading it to my computer, I'd somehow made it aware of me? With shaking hands, I picked up my camera and started scrolling through the photos. Landscape, trees, cabin exterior, lake, nothing unusual, nothing that shouldn't be there. But then I got to the photos from the first day, the ones I'd taken from the porch right after arriving. And I saw it. In the background of one photo, barely visible in the tree line about 50 yards from the cabin, was a figure. Tall and thin and wrong. It was facing the cabin, facing the camera, looking right at me through the lens. And in another photo, taken seconds later, it was closer. In a third photo, closer still. In the fourth photo, it was standing at the edge of the porch, just out of frame. I hadn't seen it when I was taking the pictures. I hadn't noticed it at all, but it had been there, watching me, moving toward me with each shot. The knocking stopped. My voice stopped. Everything went silent. And then I heard it. A whisper from right outside the door. "Let me in and I'll let you out. That's how this works. You have to invite me. You have to open the door." I sat there all night, refusing to open that door, refusing to give in. The sun finally came up around 7 in the morning. And suddenly, the front door opened easily, just swung open like there had never been anything wrong with it. I grabbed my bags and ran. I ran to my car, threw everything in the back, and drove away without looking back. I made it about 20 miles before I had to pull over. I was shaking so badly I couldn't drive safely. That's when I checked my camera again, scrolling through the photos one more time. The figure wasn't in the trees anymore. It wasn't on the porch. In the last photo I'd taken, the one from inside the cabin looking out the window, there was something in the reflection. Something standing behind me, tall and thin with those wrong hands, those two long fingers, standing right behind me while I'd been looking at my camera, looking at the photos of it approaching the cabin. I deleted every single photo, formatted the memory card, factory reset the camera. I don't know if it helped. I don't know if you can get rid of something by deleting its image, or if once you've seen it, once you've captured it, it's too late. The cabin rental company said they found nothing wrong with the property when they checked after I left. The handprints in the snow had melted. No evidence of anything unusual. But I know what happened. I know something was out there in those woods. Something that knocked on my doors and windows. Something that mimicked my voice. Something that I accidentally photographed, and by doing so, made aware of my presence. And I think it's still waiting. Still watching. Still hoping I'll come back. My name is Anastasia, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a paralegal at a law firm in downtown Seattle, which means I keep pretty regular hours and live a pretty normal, predictable life. Or at least I did until July 2020, when something happened that shattered my sense of safety in the city I'd lived in my entire life. I'd worked late that night, staying at the office until around 11, finishing up some urgent filings. This wasn't unusual for me. I often worked late, and I'd walked from my office to the Pike Place Market parking garage dozens of times at night without any problems. Seattle can feel sketchy sometimes after dark, but I'd never had any real trouble. I knew the route, knew which streets were better lit, knew where the security cameras were. I felt reasonably safe. That night, I left the office around 11:15 and started my usual walk to the garage. It was a Thursday, and the streets were quieter than usual. Most of the shops were closed, the market itself was shut down for the night, and there were only a few people scattered here and there. I had my phone in my hand, keys ready, doing all the things you're supposed to do when walking alone at night in a city. I was about 2 blocks from the garage when I first saw him. A man standing near one of the closed market stalls, just standing there, motionless in the shadows. He was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit, dark-colored, and even from a distance there was something off about him. Something about the way he stood, perfectly still, not moving at all. Most people fidget, shift their weight, do something. He was like a statue. I kept walking, keeping my distance, trying not to make eye contact. But as I passed him, I felt his eyes on me. I glanced over, and he was staring directly at me with this expression I couldn't read. Not angry, not threatening exactly, just intensely focused. And his face looked wrong somehow. His smile was too wide, stretched across his face in a way that didn't look natural, like someone had told him to smile, and he was doing his best approximation of what a smile should look like. I walked faster. I had maybe 3 more blocks to go. When I reached the corner and turned, I looked back. He wasn't at the market stall anymore. My heart started beating faster. Where had he gone? I scanned the street behind me but couldn't see him. Maybe he'd just walked away in a different direction. Maybe I was being paranoid. I kept walking. 2 more blocks. I was on Post Alley now, the narrow alley that runs behind some of the market buildings. Darker here, fewer lights, but it was the fastest route to the garage. About halfway down the alley, I saw him again. He was ahead of me now, standing under one of the few working streetlights, just standing there, facing me. That same too-wide smile. I stopped walking. My mind was trying to work out how he'd gotten ahead of me. I'd never seen him pass me. He'd been behind me, and now he was in front. The Alley was straight, no side passages, nowhere for him to have cut through without me seeing. But there he was, blocking my path. I turned around to go back the way I'd come, take a different route even if it was longer. But when I turned, he was behind me now too. Same suit, same smile, standing maybe 20 feet away perfectly still. I spun back around and he was still ahead of me as well. My eyes darted between both directions. It was impossible. He couldn't be in both places at once, but I was seeing him in front of me and behind me simultaneously. I ran. I ran toward one of the side doors of the market buildings, hoping it might be unlocked, that I could get inside and away from him. But as I ran, I saw him appear in windows I passed. Inside the building, standing in the darkness behind the glass, looking out at me. Moving from window to window, faster than anyone could possibly move, keeping pace with me as I ran. I made it to the main street back into better lighting and where there might be other people. I burst out of the alley gasping for breath and looked around wildly. A couple was walking on the other side of the street. A homeless man was sitting in a doorway. Normal people, real people. I looked back at the alley entrance. He was standing right at the edge of the darkness, not stepping into the light, just standing there at the threshold, watching me, still smiling. I ran the remaining block to the parking garage, kept running up the stairs to the third level where my car was parked. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock the door. I finally got it open, threw myself inside, locked all the doors. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, trying to calm down enough to drive safely. That's when I looked up at my rearview mirror. He was standing directly behind my car. I could see him clearly in the mirror, standing maybe 5 feet behind my bumper, illuminated by the garage lighting. Same suit, same smile, just standing there, completely motionless, staring at me through the back window. I put the car in reverse without thinking, instinct taking over. I pressed the gas and the car lurched backward. He should have moved. Any normal person would have jumped out of the way, or at least flinched. But he just stood there, as my car went right through the space where he was standing. I felt no impact, no resistance. It was like driving through air. I looked in the rearview mirror and he was gone. I sat there in my car, now backed into a different parking space, trying to understand what I'd just experienced. My logical mind kept trying to find explanations. Maybe there were multiple men in similar suits. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe I was more tired than I'd realized, and my perception was off. But none of those explanations felt right. I'd seen him appear in multiple places at once. I'd driven through him like he wasn't physically there. I finally got myself together enough to drive home. I checked all my mirrors constantly, terrified I'd see him standing on the street or appearing in my back seat. The drive home was normal. No sign of him. I made it to my apartment, ran inside, locked and bolted the door behind me. I checked every room, every closet, looked under the bed like a child afraid of monsters. Everything was normal, empty, safe. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I kept getting up to check the windows, to make sure all the locks were engaged. Around 3 in the morning, I finally dozed off on my couch with all the lights on. I woke up around 6 to my phone ringing. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Static. Just static on the line at first. And then, underneath the static, I heard something. Music. Old music, like something from the 20s or 30s. Scratchy and distant, like it was playing on an old phonograph. And then a voice, also old and distorted, speaking in a monotone. I saw you. You saw me. Now I know where you live. I know where you work. I know the path you walk. I'll be waiting for you, Anastasia. The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, ice running through my veins. It had used my name. It knew my name. I hadn't told anyone my name. I hadn't spoken to anyone. How did it know? I called in sick to work that day. I couldn't face going back downtown. Couldn't face walking those streets again. I spent the day researching, trying to find any information about strange occurrences at Pike Place Market. And I found plenty. The market is old, built in 1907, and it has a reputation for being haunted. There are stories about ghosts, about spirits of people who died there over the decades. But what I found that made my blood run cold was a specific story about a man in an old suit. Multiple people over the years had reported seeing him, a man in a vintage suit, appearing and disappearing, showing up in multiple locations simultaneously, always with that same unnaturally wide smile. Some people called him the Smiling Man. The reports went back decades. People seeing him in the market at night, being followed by him, having him appear in impossible places. Some of the reports mentioned that he seemed to pick certain people, follow them, appear to them repeatedly. But the reports always ended the same way. The person would see him for a few weeks or months, and then the sightings would stop. Or at least, the reports would stop. There was no way to know if the sightings stopped or if the people just stopped reporting them. I found one blog post from 2015 that really scared me. Someone had written about their experiences with the Smiling Man, describing almost exactly what had happened to me. The appearing in multiple places, the impossible movements, the phone call with the old music, and the voice that knew their name. The post had been updated 3 times over 6 months, each update more desperate than the last. The final update just said, "He won't leave. He's always here now. I see him everywhere, standing in my apartment, outside my window, in every reflection. I can't make him stop." There were no more updates after that. I tried to find the person who wrote it, searched their username on other platforms, tried to find any trace of them. Nothing. It was like they'd vanished after that final post. I started seeing him everywhere after that night. At first, it was just at night, glimpses of him in the shadows when I'd look out my apartment window, standing on the street below, looking up at my window. Then I started seeing him during the day, in the background of crowds when I'd go to the grocery store, standing on the other side of the street when I was at a coffee shop, always at a distance, always just standing there, always with that smile. The worst was seeing him inside places. I'd catch a glimpse of him in bathroom mirrors, just standing behind me for a split second before disappearing. I'd see him reflected in windows and screens. Once I saw him standing in my shower when I pulled back the curtain, just standing there, water running right through him like he wasn't there at all. He was there for maybe 2 seconds, and then he was gone. I moved apartments, changed my routine, stopped going anywhere near Pike Place Market, started parking in a different garage. None of it helped. He kept appearing, always at a distance now, never close enough to feel like an immediate threat, but always there. Always watching, always reminding me that he knew where I was. I found a photo of Pike Place Market from 1923 while doing more research, historical archives, old photographs of the market in its early days. And there he was, standing in the background of a group photo, dozens of people posed for the camera. And there in the back, slightly out of focus, was a man in a dark suit, the same suit. And even though the photo was black and white and grainy, even though you couldn't make out details clearly, I could see he was smiling. That same too wide smile. He's been there for over 100 years, standing in that market, following people, appearing and disappearing. No one knows what he is or what he wants. A ghost? Something else? I don't know. But I know he chose me that night in July, and I don't think he's going to stop. I see him almost every day now, sometimes just for a second, sometimes for longer, always watching, always smiling, always reminding me that I saw him, and now he sees me, and there's nothing I can do to make him go away. My name is Isabel, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a geologist, which means I spend a lot of time outdoors, hiking into remote areas, collecting samples, studying rock formations. I've always loved the wilderness, always felt comfortable in places where most people would feel vulnerable. I thought I understood the risks of working in isolated locations. I thought I knew how to stay safe. What happened to me in May 2019 proved I was wrong about everything. I was part of a 3-person team doing research near Mount St. Helens, specifically in the area around Ape Cave. If you're not familiar with it, Ape Cave is a lava tube, one of the longest in North America, formed thousands of years ago by flowing lava. It's a popular tourist spot during summer, but in May it's usually pretty empty. We were there to study the geological formations, take samples, document some of the less explored sections of the cave system. My team consisted of me and 2 colleagues, Stephen and Kylo. Stephen was the senior researcher, been doing this kind of work for 20 years. Kylo was younger, just a few years out of graduate school, but experienced and competent. We'd worked together before on other projects. We trusted each other, had good communication, followed all the safety protocols. We were prepared, or so we thought. We entered the cave around 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. The main tourist section of Ape Cave is well lit and relatively safe, but we were heading into some of the deeper unmapped sections. We had headlamps, backup lights, rope, emergency supplies, GPS trackers, radios, everything we needed. The plan was to spend about 6 hours inside documenting formations and collecting samples, then head back out before dark. The first few hours went smoothly. We moved through the main tunnel, taking notes, photographing interesting formations. The cave was beautiful in that stark, alien way that underground spaces can be. Walls of dark volcanic rock, frozen in the shapes they'd taken when the lava cooled thousands of years ago. It was cold, maybe 45 degrees, and our breath made small clouds in the beam of our headlamps. Around 1 in the afternoon, we reached a section that wasn't on any of our maps, a side passage that branched off from the main tunnel, heading deeper into the mountain. Stephen wanted to explore it, document it properly, since it wasn't in the official records. Kylo and I agreed. This was exactly the kind of discovery we'd been hoping for. We marked our entry point carefully, made sure our GPS units were recording our position, and headed into the unknown passage. The passage was narrower than the main tunnel, requiring us to walk single file in some places. Stephen went first. I was in the middle. Kylo brought up the rear. We'd gone maybe 200 yards when we found the chamber. It opened up suddenly, our lights revealing a space about the size of a large living room. The ceiling was high, maybe 15 feet up, and the walls were covered in unusual formations we'd never seen before. But it was what was on the floor that made us all stop. Bones. Lots of them. Arranged in patterns, circles within circles, radiating out from a central point. They weren't animal bones. They were too large, the proportions wrong. Each bone looked like it could have been human but scaled up, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall if assembled into a complete skeleton. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all arranged in these precise geometric patterns. "What the hell is this?" Kylo said, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. Stephen was already moving closer, examining the bones with his flashlight. "These aren't recent," he said. "Look at the weathering, the way they've been here for decades at least, maybe longer." I was taking photos, documenting everything. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The bones weren't just arranged randomly. They formed symbols, characters of some kind. Not any language I recognized, but definitely intentional, definitely meant to communicate something. And at the center of the pattern was what looked like a cairn, a pile of smaller bones stacked carefully on top of each other. "We should document this and get out," I said. Something about the chamber felt wrong. The air was colder here than in the rest of the cave, and there was a smell, faint but distinctive, like earth in decay and something else I couldn't identify. Stephen agreed. We spent about 20 minutes taking photos, measurements, GPS readings. Then we headed back toward the passage we'd come through. That's when we discovered the passage was gone. Not collapsed, not blocked, just gone. Where there should have been an opening in the wall, there was solid rock. All 3 of us stood there, staring at it. our lights illuminating smooth volcanic stone where a tunnel had been just 20 minutes earlier. "This isn't possible," Kylo said. "We came through right here. I marked it. Look, there's my chalk mark on the wall." He was right. His chalk mark was there, right next to solid rock where the passage should have been. Stephen pulled out his GPS unit. "We're in the right place," he said. "According to this, we're standing exactly where we entered the chamber. But the passage isn't here." We spent the next hour searching the chamber, running our hands along every inch of wall, looking for any crack or opening we might have missed. Nothing. The chamber was sealed except for a different passage on the opposite side, one we hadn't noticed before because it was partially hidden behind a rock formation. "We'll have to go through there," Stephen said. "It's the only way out." We didn't have much choice. We entered the new passage, moving carefully, constantly checking our GPS to try to figure out where we were in relation to the cave system we knew. But the GPS wasn't working properly anymore. The signal kept cutting in and out, and when it did work, it showed us in locations that didn't make sense, sometimes placing us hundreds of feet outside the known cave system. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers, sometimes narrowing so much we had to squeeze through sideways. And everywhere we went, we found more bones. More of those two large skeletons, some arranged in patterns, others just scattered like something had torn them apart. The walls started showing marks too. Carved symbols, the same characters we'd seen in that first chamber. They covered entire sections of wall, hundreds of symbols we couldn't read, couldn't understand. "How far have we gone?" I asked after what felt like hours of walking. Stephen checked his watch. "About 3 hours since we found the first chamber. We should have reached an exit by now. We should have found the main tunnel. But we hadn't. We were lost in a section of cave that shouldn't exist, surrounded by bones that couldn't be explained, following a tunnel that kept leading us deeper instead of out. And that's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere ahead of us in the darkness. Something moving. Something large, judging by the sound. Heavy footsteps on stone getting closer. We froze. Our lights pointed down the passage, illuminating maybe 30 feet ahead before the tunnel curved. The footsteps continued, steady and deliberate, coming toward us. And then we saw it. Just for a second, just a glimpse, as something massive moved through our light beams. Tall, so tall it had to duck under the cave ceiling. Covered in matted hair or fur. Moving on 2 legs but hunched forward, arms almost dragging the ground. It crossed from one side passage to another and disappeared, but not before we all got a clear look at its profile. Not human, not quite ape. Something in between. Something that shouldn't exist. None of us spoke. We just started running back the way we'd come, not caring about safety protocols or documentation anymore. Just running, our lights bouncing wildly, our breath coming in gasps. Behind us, we could hear footsteps. Heavy, thundering footsteps following us. Not running, just walking at that same steady pace, but somehow keeping up with our panicked sprint. We ran for maybe 10 minutes before Kylo grabbed my arm and pulled me to a stop. "Listen," he said. I was gasping too hard to hear anything at first, but then I realized what he meant. Silence. The footsteps had stopped. Whatever had been following us was gone, or at least we couldn't hear it anymore. We stood there, catching our breath, trying to figure out what to do. That's when Stephen's light fell on something that made us all stare. An opening in the wall. Not the passage we'd been running through, but a different one. And through it, we could see daylight. Actual daylight, filtering in from somewhere above. We practically climbed over each other trying to get through that opening. It led to a narrow vertical shaft, rough handholds in the rock, climbing maybe 40 feet up to the surface. We scrambled up, scraping our hands and knees, not caring about anything except getting out of that cave. We emerged in a part of the forest we didn't recognize, at least a mile from where we'd entered the cave. It took us 2 hours to hike back to our vehicles. None of us talked about what we'd seen. We packed up our equipment in silence and drove back to our hotel. The next day, Stephen made some calls to the U.S. Forest Service, reported what we'd found. They sent a team to investigate. They found the main entrance to Ape Cave exactly where it should be. They found the tourist sections, all normal, all matching the maps. But they couldn't find the chamber with the bones. They couldn't find the passages we'd walked through. They couldn't find the vertical shaft we'd climbed out of. According to their survey, none of it existed. Our GPS data was corrupted, all of it. The photos on my camera showed the bones, showed the symbols on the walls, but the metadata was wrong. The timestamps were off by decades. The location data placed us in areas of the mountain that are solid rock according to seismic surveys. It was like we'd stepped sideways into a version of the cave that existed in a different time or place. Stephen retired after that. Just quit geology entirely, moved to the East Coast, won't talk about what happened. Kylo still does field work, but refuses to go into any cave, anywhere, for any reason. And me, I still work as a geologist, but I've specialized in surface studies now. I'll never go underground again. I'll never forget those bones, those symbols, that thing we saw moving through the darkness. Something lives in those caves under Mount St. Helens. Something that's been there long enough to leave bones arranged in patterns, to carve symbols into volcanic rock, to build chambers in spaces that shouldn't exist. The local Native American tribes have stories about the area around Mount St. Helens, stories about giants, about spirits that live in the mountain, about places that humans shouldn't go. After what I experienced, I believe every one of those stories. We disturbed something that day. We went into a place we weren't meant to find, and something knew we were there. Something followed us, and I think the only reason we made it out is because whatever it was decided to let us go. I still have nightmares about being in that chamber, surrounded by those massive bones arranged in patterns I couldn't understand. I dream about the footsteps following us through passages that don't exist on any map. And sometimes I wake up convinced I can hear them still. Those heavy footsteps, patient and steady, walking through the darkness, waiting for me to come back underground. My name is Eduardo, and I'm 45 years old. I've been a rural mail carrier for the past 15 years, driving the same routes through the back roads near Forks on the Olympic Peninsula. It's quiet work, repetitive, but I've always liked it. You get to know the land, the houses, the people. You become part of the rhythm of these small communities. Or at least, I thought I knew the land. What happened to me in December 2022 proved that even after 15 years of driving the same roads every day, there are things you can miss. Things that hide in plain sight until they decide to reveal themselves. My route covered about 60 miles of rural roads, winding through dense forest and past scattered farms and houses. I knew every mailbox, every driveway, every pothole. I could drive it with my eyes closed. The route never changed. Same stops in the same order, 5 days a week, year after year. It was December, rainy and cold like it always is that time of year on the peninsula. The fog was thick that morning, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet, but I'd driven in worse. I was about halfway through my route when I noticed it. A mailbox I didn't recognize. It was one of those large, rural mailboxes, black metal, sitting on a wooden post at the end of a gravel driveway. The address was painted on the side in white numbers. I slowed down and checked my delivery list. Yes, there it was. An address I had mail for. But I had no memory of this mailbox ever being there before. I pulled over and got out with the mail. The driveway led back into the trees, disappearing into the fog after about 20 feet. I couldn't see a house from the road, but that wasn't unusual out here. Lots of properties have long driveways, houses set way back from the road for privacy. I put the mail in the box, got back in my truck, and continued my route. But the mailbox bothered me. I drove these roads every single day. How had I never noticed it before? That evening, I mentioned it to my wife over dinner. "There was a mailbox on the route today I don't remember ever seeing before," I said. She just shrugged. "Maybe someone just put it up. People move in and out." But I knew that wasn't right. The mailbox looked old, weathered. It had been there for years, not days. And I'd been delivering mail on that exact stretch of road for 15 years. I would have remembered it. The next day, I approached that section of my route with more attention. And there it was again. Same black mailbox, same address. I had mail for it again. I delivered it and continued on, but something was nagging at me. I pulled over about a quarter mile past the mailbox and checked my route book, the detailed map that showed every delivery address. The address was listed. It had always been listed. According to my records, I'd been delivering mail to that address for years, but I had no memory of it, none at all. I tried to think back, tried to remember delivering mail there before yesterday, but my mind was completely blank. It was like the mailbox, the address, the entire property had just appeared in my reality yesterday, but all the records said it had always been there. Over the next week, I paid close attention every time I passed that mailbox. It was always there. I delivered mail to it every day. Sometimes just junk mail and bills, but regular delivery, nothing unusual. Except I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The driveway always disappeared into the trees. I never saw the house. Never saw anyone coming or going. Never saw any cars or signs of activity. On the 8th day, I decided to drive up the driveway. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or just the need to prove to myself that there was a normal house up there, with normal people living in normal lives. I pulled into the driveway and started driving back through the trees. The driveway was longer than I expected. I drove for maybe 300 yards through dense forest before it opened up into a clearing. And there was the house, except it didn't look right. The architecture was wrong. It was a Victorian-style house, large and ornate, the kind you'd see in old neighborhoods in Seattle or Port Townsend. But the paint was faded, the wraparound porch was sagging, and some of the windows were broken. It looked abandoned. But I'd been delivering mail here for over a week. Someone was receiving this mail. I parked my truck and got out. The fog was thicker here, swirling around the house in a way that made it hard to focus on. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I walked around to the side of the house, looking in windows. The interior was dark, but I could make out shapes. Furniture. Old furniture covered in dust sheets. No lights. No signs of anyone living there. I completed a circle around the house and came back to the front. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The house was different. Not dramatically different, but changed. The porch railing was intact now, where it had been broken on my first circle. One of the windows I'd seen broken was now whole. The paint looked slightly less faded. The house had changed while I'd been walking around it. I got back in my truck and drove out of there as fast as I could without being reckless. When I reached the road, I looked back. The driveway was there, leading back into the trees. The mailbox was there. Everything looked normal. I continued my route, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the house, the way it had changed. The next morning, I decided to check the property records at the county assessor's office. I looked up the address. According to the records, the property existed. It had been there since 1892. But here's what made me feel sick. The ownership records stopped in 1916. The last registered owner was a woman named Catherine Mills. After 1916, there were no more records, no sales, no transfers, no tax payments. The property just existed in a kind of legal limbo, neither abandoned nor occupied. I found old newspaper articles from 1916. A family had lived in that house. Catherine Mills, her husband, and their 2 children. One morning in March, The mail carrier had found their mailbox overflowing with several days of uncollected mail. He'd driven up to check on them and found the house empty. Completely empty. Not just of people, but of everything. No furniture, no belongings, no sign anyone had ever lived there. The family had vanished. The house had been emptied overnight. No one ever found out what happened to them. After that discovery, I started noticing more strange things about the mailbox. The mail I delivered there was never picked up. Day after day, I'd put mail in the box, and day after day, it would still be there when I came back. But with new space for me to add more mail, the box never filled up. It was like the mail was disappearing and reappearing, always leaving room for more. I started paying attention to what I was delivering. Bills addressed to Catherine Mills, catalogs from companies that went out of business decades ago, letters with postmarks from 1915, 1916, dates that didn't make sense. I was delivering mail from over 100 years ago to a woman who had vanished in 1916. One day, I found a letter in my delivery stack addressed to me, not to my home address, but to the post office, in care of the rural route. My name written in elegant handwriting on expensive paper. It had no return address, no postmark. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in that same elegant script. Thank you for your faithful service. You've been delivering our mail for much longer than you remember. Please don't stop now. We depend on you. The house depends on you. If the mail stops coming, we'll have to come looking for it. I showed the letter to my supervisor. She looked at me like I was crazy. There's no delivery address on this route matching the one you're describing, she said. She pulled up the route map on her computer. See? That section of road has only 2 addresses, and you've been delivering to both of them for years. There's no third address. But I could see it on my own route sheet. I could drive to it. I could see the mailbox. Yet, according to the official records, according to my supervisor's computer, according to everything except my own memory and my own eyes, it didn't exist. I kept delivering to that address. What else could I do? The letter had said not to stop. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I did. Every day, I'd put mail in that black mailbox at the end of the driveway that led to the house that changed every time I looked at it. Mail addressed to people who vanished a century ago. Mail that disappeared and reappeared. Mail from times that shouldn't exist. 2 months after I first noticed the mailbox, I was delivering on a particularly foggy morning. I pulled up to the black mailbox like always, but this time when I got out of my truck, I saw someone standing at the end of the driveway. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, long and dark, from maybe the early 1900s. She was just standing there in the fog, watching me. I put the mail in the box slowly, not taking my eyes off her. She smiled and raised one hand in a small wave. "Thank you," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away, even though she was only 20 feet from me. "You're a good mail carrier. Very reliable, not like the last one." "The last one?" I asked, my voice barely working. "He stopped delivering our mail, said the route had changed, said we didn't exist, so we had to go find him. Had to explain how important the mail is, how we need it, how the house needs it." "What happened to him?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She smiled wider. "He's with us now, in the house. He understands now. He delivers mail inside the house, room to room, time to time. He'll be doing it forever, just like you will if you ever stop." I got back in my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The woman was still standing there, still smiling, as I drove away. I looked in my rearview mirror, and she was gone. Just fog and trees, and that black mailbox. I requested a route change the next day. My supervisor approved it without question. Seemed relieved, actually, though she never said why. I've been on a different route for 3 months now. All residential addresses in town, nothing rural, nothing isolated. But sometimes, when I'm sorting mail in the morning, I find letters addressed to Catherine Mills. Letters that shouldn't be in my stack because I don't deliver to that route anymore. And I know that eventually I'm going to have to deliver them. Because the house remembers me. The house knows I'm its mail carrier. And the house doesn't like to be disappointed. The new carrier on my old route quit after 2 weeks. Wouldn't say why, just turned in his resignation and left. They've gone through 4 carriers on that route in 3 months. Nobody lasts. I could tell them why. I could warn them about the black mailbox that appears and disappears, about the house that changes, about the woman in the fog who smiles and waves and threatens you in the politest possible way. But who would believe me? I still have that letter, the one addressed to me warning me not to stop delivering. I keep it in my glove compartment. Sometimes I take it out and read it again, just to remind myself that it was real, that I didn't imagine it. And sometimes, late at night, I think about the last mail carrier, the one before me. The one who's in the house now, delivering mail room to room, time to time, forever. And I wonder if that's what's waiting for me too. The next time I find one of those letters in my stack. The next time the house decides it's time for me to come back. My name is Xander, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an environmental consultant, which means I spend a lot of time on ferries, traveling between the islands and the mainland for various projects. I've taken the Washington State ferry system hundreds of times over the past decade. The routes are familiar, the routine is comfortable, and I've never had any reason to feel unsafe on these vessels. Until March 2023, when I took what should have been a simple late-night ferry ride from Bainbridge Island back to Seattle, and encountered something that still makes me question everything I think I understand about reality. It was a foggy Friday night, and I'd been visiting a client on Bainbridge Island. The meeting had run late, and by the time I got to the ferry terminal, it was almost 11 o'clock. The last ferry of the night. I was tired, looking forward to getting home, taking a hot shower, and going to bed. The terminal was nearly empty. Maybe a dozen other people waiting, most of them looking as tired as I felt. The ferry pulled in, we all boarded, and I headed up to the passenger deck. I found a seat by one of the large windows and settled in for the 35-minute crossing. The fog was thick, turning the water and sky into an indistinguishable gray void. The ferry's lights barely penetrated it. I could hear the engines rumbling beneath my feet, feel the gentle rocking as we pulled away from the dock. Normal. Everything was completely normal. About 10 minutes into the crossing, I noticed her. A woman sitting alone about 3 rows ahead of me. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in photos from the early 20th century. Long, dark fabric, high collar, long sleeves. Her hair was pinned up in a style that hadn't been fashionable in probably 80 years. She was soaking wet. Water dripped from her dress onto the floor, pooled around her shoes. But nobody else seemed to notice her. The few other passengers were looking at their phones, reading, sleeping. Nobody was paying any attention to the dripping wet woman in the antique dress. I watched her for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Maybe she was part of some historical reenactment group, but that didn't explain why she was soaking wet, or why nobody else seemed to see her. She sat perfectly still, staring out the window at the fog, not moving, not looking around, just staring into the gray void. Then she turned her head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and I felt ice run down my spine. Her eyes were empty, not cruel or threatening, just empty, like looking into dark water. She held my gaze for several seconds, then slowly stood up and started walking toward me. I looked around frantically. None of the other passengers were reacting. A crew member walked past her without even glancing in her direction. She was invisible to everyone except me. She stopped right in front of my seat, water still dripping from her dress, and said my name, Xander. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You can see me. That's unfortunate." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely working. "I'm a passenger," she said. "I've been a passenger on this route for a very long time, since 1997. Do you know what happened in 1997? I shook my head, unable to speak. There was an accident, a near collision in the fog, much like tonight. The ferry turned hard to avoid another vessel. I was on the deck. I went over the railing, into the water. It was very cold. I drowned before they could get to me. My mouth went dry. You're a ghost. She smiled slightly. I prefer passenger. I still ride this ferry, every night, looking for something I lost. What did you lose? Instead of answering, she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded piece of newspaper. She held it out to me. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want anything to do with whatever this was, but my hand reached out on its own and took the paper. It was wet, the ink smudged and running, but I could still read the headline. Ferry near miss averted, collision avoided by seconds. The date was March 15th, 1997. The article described how a ferry on the Bainbridge-Seattle route had nearly collided with another vessel in heavy fog. Emergency maneuvers had prevented disaster. 15 people would have died in the collision, the article said. 15 names listed in the article as passengers who would have been killed if the collision had occurred. My name was on the list, Xander Morrison. But that was impossible. In 1997, I'd been 11 years old living in California. I'd never been to Washington State. I'd never been on a ferry. There was no way my name should be on that list. You weren't supposed to be on this ferry tonight, the woman said. None of the 15 were supposed to be on any ferry on this date, any year, for the rest of their lives. The universe course-corrected in 1997 to save you all. But you're here anyway. You've disrupted the pattern. I don't understand, I said. What does this mean? It means the collision is going to happen now, tonight, because you're here when you shouldn't be. The universe has been waiting 26 years to complete what should have happened. And now it will. As if on cue, I heard shouting from the crew, running footsteps. An alarm started blaring. The ferry lurched suddenly, engines roaring as someone threw them into reverse. I stumbled, grabbing the seat in front of me. Through the window, I saw lights appearing in the fog. Another ferry, massive and dark, heading straight toward us. Too close. Way too close. The woman was still standing there, perfectly balanced despite the ferry's violent maneuvering. You need to warn them, she said. The captain. Tell him to turn harder. Tell him now. Or 15 people die tonight just like they should have in 1997. I ran. I ran toward the bridge, pushing past confused passengers, ignoring the crew members telling me to return to my seat. I burst onto the bridge where the captain and 2 crew members were frantically working. You need to turn harder, I shouted. There's not enough room. You need to turn harder now. The captain looked at me like I was insane. Sir, you need to leave the bridge immediately. Please, I begged. Just trust me. Turn harder. You're going to hit them. Something in my voice must have convinced him, or maybe it was just instinct, but he grabbed the controls and turned the wheel hard over. The ferry heeled sharply, throwing me against the wall. Through the windows, I watched the other ferry pass. So close I could see people in the windows. Close enough that if someone had reached out from either vessel, they could have touched the other ship, but we didn't hit. The 2 ferries passed each other with maybe 10 feet to spare, and then we were clear, the other ferry disappearing into the fog behind us. The captain was shaking. That was too close, he said. That was way too close. How did you know we needed more clearance? I couldn't answer. I just slumped against the wall, my legs weak. A crew member escorted me back to the passenger deck, told me to sit down and stay seated for the rest of the crossing. I went back to my seat by the window. The woman was still there, still wet, still standing in the aisle watching me. You changed it, she said. You saved them. The collision didn't happen. What about you? I asked. Are you still here, still trapped? She looked down at her wet dress, at the water still pooling at her feet. I've been here for 26 years, Xander. I'll be here for 26 more, and 26 after that. I'm part of the ferry now, part of the route. I ride every night, warning people who can see me, trying to prevent what happened to me from happening to others. How many others can see you? Not many, Most people look right through me. But every few years, someone like you gets on the ferry. Someone who can see. Someone who needs to see because they're here when they shouldn't be. And I give them a choice. Ignore the warning and let fate take its course, or act and change the future. What happens to people who ignore the warning? She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, heading toward the rear of the passenger deck. I watched her go, watched her walk through a closed door without opening it, disappearing from view. The rest of the crossing was uneventful. We docked in Seattle right on schedule. As I was getting off the ferry, a crew member stopped me. "The captain wants to thank you," she said. He reviewed the radar logs. We were closer to collision than he realized. Your warning gave him the extra second he needed. You probably saved lives tonight. I just nodded and kept walking. What could I say? That a ghost had given me a newspaper from 1997 with my name on a list of people who should have died. That I'd seen my own death prevented 26 years before it happened. I still have the newspaper clipping. It's in my wallet, faded and water-stained, but still readable. I take it out sometimes and look at my name on that list. Xander Morrison, age 34, environmental consultant, Seattle. Listed as one of 15 people who would have died in a ferry collision on March 15th, 1997, if that collision had occurred. But it didn't occur. And it didn't occur again in 2023 because I was warned. I still take ferries for work. I have to. But I never take the late-night runs anymore. I always book the earlier ferries, the ones with more passengers, more light, less fog. And I always look around the passenger deck carefully, looking for wet footprints, looking for someone in old-fashioned clothes, looking for her, because I know she's still there, still riding that route every night, still soaking wet from her fall into the cold water in 1997, still watching for passengers who can see her, passengers who need to be warned. She's a permanent passenger now, trapped between life and death, riding an endless route, trying to save people from the fate she couldn't escape. Sometimes I wonder about the other 14 names on that list. Are they still alive? Do they know how close they came to dying on a foggy night in 1997? Do they take ferries, or do they avoid them without knowing why? And I wonder if there are others like her, other passengers who never made it home, other spirits trapped on other routes, riding forever, warning the living about dangers they can no longer escape themselves. The Washington State ferry system carries millions of passengers every year. Most of them make it home safely, but some don't. And those who don't, maybe they don't really leave. Maybe they just keep riding, night after night, fog or clear, forever making the same crossing, forever watching for the collision that's always about to happen, forever trying to save the living from joining the dead. I made it home that night. I'm still here. But part of me is still on that ferry, still watching that woman in her wet dress walk through a closed door, still feeling the ferry lurch as we barely avoided collision, still hearing her voice saying my name. And I know that the next time I see her, if there is a next time, it might not be a warning. It might be an invitation, because eventually we all become passengers on that final crossing, the one with no return trip, the one that disappears into the fog and never comes back. That's the end of our 11 disturbing stories from Washington State. If these tales kept you up at night, then Bleak Fears has done its job. We bring you real horror from real places, stories that blur the line between the possible and the impossible. Subscribe to Bleak Fears for more terrifying tales that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world around you. Until next time, stay afraid.